In the shadow of war's end, a chilling mystery unfolds at Pennington Hall, where the cliffs hide secrets darker than the sea. Sir Reginald Pennington is dead, his body broken on the rocks below, the tide whispering of foul play. Was it a tragic fall, or a murder cloaked in fog? Enter Hercule Poirot, the meticulous Belgian detective whose little grey cells unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and hidden motives. Who among the elegant Lady Eleanor, her resentful son Charles, the secretive Clara Henshaw, or the shadowy solicitor, Roland Baxter holds the key to the truth. Every clue matters, every secret festers, and the final twist will shock you. Dive into this Agatha Christie-style audiobook, where suspense grips you in the first 30 seconds and questions linger until the last. Can you solve the mystery before Poirot reveals all? Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. It was in the summer of 1946, a year after the great conflagration of the war had finally sputtered to its end, that I, Captain Arthur Hastings, found myself once more entangled in the intricate web of human affairs that so often leads to the doorstep of my old friend Hercule Poirot. The world was attempting to mend itself, with rationed books still in hand and the scars of bombing raids etched upon the landscape like grim reminders of recent horrors. Yet, in the English countryside, one might almost forget the turmoil, were it not for the subtle undercurrents of resentment and readjustment that rippled through society. I had been invited to spend a fortnight at Tide's End, the sprawling estate of the Linwood family, situated on the banks of the River Thames where it widened into an estuary, subject to the whims of the tide. The house itself was a grand old pile Georgian in origin, with tall chimneys and mullioned windows that overlooked the swirling waters. The tide, they said, could rise with alarming speed, flooding the lower meadows and isolating the property from the mainland for hours at a time. It was a fitting metaphor, I thought, for the family's fortunes, which had ebbed and flowed with the war's demands. The invitation had come from my distant cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Linwood, the matriarch of the clan. Eleanor was a woman of formidable presence, tall and angular, with sharp grey eyes that missed nothing. Her husband, Colonel Geoffrey Linwood, had made a tidy fortune during the war through contracts for military supplies, blankets, boots, and the like, though whispers suggested not all his dealings had been above board. The colonel was a bluff, red-faced man, fond of his port and his hunting stories. But there was a hardness about him, a calculation that belied his jovial exterior. I arrived by train at the nearby station of Marshford, where a chauffeur in a rather worn uniform collected me in the family's aging dime. The drive to Tide's End took us through lush, green lanes, the air heavy with the scent of salt and mud from the river. As we approached, the house loomed against a sky heavy with clouds, promising rain. The tide was out, exposing vast mud, dotted with wading birds, their cries piercing the stillness. Upon entering the hall, with its polished oak floors and portraits of stern ancestors, I was greeted by Eleanor herself. "Arthur, my dear cousin," she said, extending a gloved hand. "How good of you to come. We are all in need of a little distraction after these trying years." The we encompassed quite a gathering. The Linwoods had summoned the family for what Eleanor termed a reunion, though I suspected there was more to it. Post-war finances were tight, and old estates like Tide's End required upkeep that strained even the colonel's resources. Rumors abounded that Geoffrey intended to announce some grand scheme, perhaps selling off land or investing in a new venture to secure the family's future. First among the guests was David Linwood, the colonel's nephew and heir presumptive. David was a handsome fellow in his early 30s, with the lean build of a former RAF pilot. He had flown Spitfires during the Battle of Britain and bore a slight limp from a crash landing in '44. There was a restlessness about him, a dissatisfaction, that manifested in sharp remarks and a fondness for the bottle. He had married during the war a vivacious actress named Lydia, who now lounged in the drawing-room with a cigarette in hand, her laughter a trifle too loud for the somber surroundings. Then there was Frances, the colonel's sister, of indeterminate age, with a pinched face and a habit of quoting scripture at inopportune moments. She lived in a small cottage on the estate and tended the gardens with a devotion that bordered on obsession. Her presence added a note of piety to the proceedings, though I detected an undercurrent of bitterness, perhaps resentment at her brother's prosperity while she scraped by on a meager allowance. Adjoining Frances in the family tree was her daughter, Rosamond, a quiet young woman of 25, recently demobbed from the Wrens. Rosamond had a delicate beauty, with fair hair and eyes that seemed perpetually shadowed by some inner worry. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice was soft and measured, revealing a keen intelligence. The circle was completed by Major Lionel Cartwright, a wartime associate of the colonel's, who had stayed on after the armistice as a sort of business advisor. Cartwright was a burly man with a military moustache and a booming voice, ever ready with tales of campaigns in North Africa. His wife Beatrice was his opposite. Small, mousy, and given to nervous flutters, they occupied the guest wing, and I wondered at their prolonged visit. Surely the major had affairs of his own to attend. Lastly, there was Dr. Elias Thorne, the local physician, who had been invited for the weekend. Thorne was a scholarly sort, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a penchant for discussing the latest medical advances. He had treated the family for years and was privy to their ailments, both physical and perhaps otherwise. That evening, as the tide began to creep back in, we assembled in the drawing room for aperitifs. The room was elegantly furnished, with heavy velvet curtains and a grand piano in the corner. A fire crackled in the grate, warding off the chill that seeped from the river. Conversation flowed politely, touching on the weather, the government's latest policies, and the scarcity of decent servants. "These socialists will be the ruin of us," grumbled the colonel, swirling his sherry. "Taxing a man out of house and home. Mark my words, we'll all be in the poorhouse before long." David laughed bitterly. "Some of us are halfway there already. Uncle, if it weren't for your generosity, Lydia and I would be queuing for rations like the rest." Lydia shot her husband a glance, her painted lips curving in a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Darling, must you? We're here to enjoy ourselves." Francis sniffed. "Enjoyment is fleeting, as the good book says. We should be grateful for what we have." Rosamond sat silently by the window, gazing out at the darkening water. The tide was rising swiftly now, lapping at the stone terrace. I approached her, seeking to draw her into the fold. "It must be a relief to be home after your service, Miss Linwood." She turned, her expression distant. "Home, yes, I suppose, though everything seems changed. The war, it alters one's perspective." Before I could probe further, Beatrice Cartwright entered, her face pale. "Oh dear, the tide is so high tonight. I do hope the cellars don't flood again." Major Cartwright patted her arm. "Nonsense, my love. The house has stood for centuries. A bit of water won't harm it." Dr. Thorne, nursing a glass of whiskey, nodded sagely. "Indeed, nature's rhythms are predictable, unlike human nature." The remark hung in the air, oddly portentous. Eleanor, ever the hostess, steered the talk to lighter matters, the upcoming village fete, the prospects for the harvest. Yet beneath the civility, I sensed tensions, fleeting glances, unspoken words. David and Lydia exchanged whispers. Frances eyed her brother with thinly veiled disapproval, and Rosamond's fingers twisted a handkerchief in her lap. Dinner was served. In the dining room, a formal affair with silver candelabra and crystal glasses. The menu, though constrained by rations, was admirable: consomme, roast pheasant, and a trifle for pudding. Conversation turned to the colonel's plans. "I've something to announce tomorrow," Geoffrey said, tapping his knife against his glass. "A family matter, but one that affects us all. Let's just say the tide is turning in our favor." Murmurs of curiosity followed, but he would say no more. As coffee was poured, the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. The tide had reached its peak, the river a black expanse under the moonless sky. I retired to my room that night with a vague unease. Tide's End seemed a haven of tranquility, yet I could not shake the feeling that currents ran deep beneath the surface. Little did I know that by morning, those currents would drag us all into a maelstrom of suspicion and deceit. The next day dawned gray and drizzly, the tide receding to reveal sodden grounds. I rose early, taking a constitutional along the river path. The air was fresh, laced with the temps of salt. Returning to the house, I encountered Rosamond in the conservatory, arranging flowers. "Good morning," I said. "Slept well?" She hesitated. "Not particularly. Dreams. Odd dreams." Before she could elaborate, a scream pierced the air from the direction of the study. We rushed toward it, joined by others emerging from their rooms. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her hand to her mouth. Inside, slumped over his desk, was Colonel Geoffrey Linwood. His face was contorted, a vial of what appeared to be poison clutched in his rigid hand. The room smelled faintly of almond cyanide, I thought with a chill. Dr. Thorne pushed past, kneeling to examine the body. "He's dead, poisoned, by the look of it." David, pale and shaken, muttered, "Suicide." "But why?" Frances crossed herself. "The wages of sin." But as the police were summoned, I wondered. The colonel had spoken of fortunes turning. Suicide seemed unlikely. No, this had the mark of murder. Chapter 2. The shadow of the crime. The morning at Tide's End was cloaked in a drizzle that seemed to mirror the gloom within the house. The discovery of Colonel Geoffrey Linwood's body had shattered the fragile veneer of civility that had prevailed. The previous evening, the study where the colonel lay dead was now a scene of hushed chaos, with the family and guests hovering at the edges, their faces a tableau of shock, grief, and perhaps guilt. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the doorway, his mind racing. The study was a masculine sanctuary, its walls lined with bookshelves and hunting trophies, a heavy oak desk dominating the center. The colonel's body remained slumped over it, his head resting on a blotter stained with ink, and now, tragically, with death, the vial in his hand, small and made of dark glass, glinted dully in the gray light filtering through the window. The faint, bitter scent of almonds lingered, confirming Hastings' suspicion of cyanide. Dr. Elias Thorne, ever the professional, had taken charge until the authorities could arrive. "No one must touch anything," he declared, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "The police will need to see the scene as it is." Eleanor Linwood, her composure fraying, stood rigid by the fireplace. "How could this happen?" she murmured, her gray eyes darting to each face in the room. "Geoffrey was perfectly well last night. This is monstrous." David Linwood, leaning against the wall, lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Suicide, you think? He was under pressure, wasn't he? All that talk about finances and turning tides. Lydia, his wife, shot him a sharp look. Don't be absurd. David, Jeffrey wasn't the sort to take his own life. He was too stubborn. Her tone carried an edge, as if she resented having to defend her uncle in law. Francis, clutching a rosary, muttered, "The Lord judges those who stray." Perhaps this was his reckoning. Her words drew a gasp from Beatrice Cartwright, who hovered near her husband, Major Lionel Cartwright, her small frame trembling. Major Cartwright cleared his throat. Now, Francis. Let's not leap to conclusions. The man's dead, and we owe it to him to find out what happened. Rosamond, standing quietly near the window, said nothing, but her pale face and tightly clasped hands betrayed her distress. Hastings noted her silence, wondering what thoughts churned behind those shadowed eyes. The local constable, a ruddy-faced man named Perkins, arrived within the hour, accompanied by a sergeant and a photographer. The tide, mercifully, had receded, enough to allow their small boat to dock at the estate's jetty. Perkins surveyed the scene with a mixture of awe and discomfort, clearly unaccustomed to such high-profile tragedies. "Poison, you say, Dr. Thorne?" Perkins asked, scratching his chin. "Looks like cyanide. Right enough. We'll need the coroner to confirm." "Any idea where he got it?" Thorne shook his head. "Cyanide isn't exactly a household item, Constable. It's used in some industrial processes, perhaps in pest control, but I can't imagine why Jeffrey would have it, or how it got into him," Perkins muttered, eyeing the vial. He turned to the family. "When did you last see the colonel alive?" Eleanor spoke first. "At dinner, around 8 o'clock. He was in good spirits, talking about some announcement he planned for today. We all retired by 11. David nodded. "I saw him in the hall around 10:30. He was heading to the study. Said he had papers to review." Lydia added, "I went to bed shortly after. I heard nothing unusual." Frances pursed her lips. "I was in my room praying by 9. The house was quiet." Rosamond's voice was barely audible. "I saw him at 10. Perhaps he was in the conservatory. Looking at the tide, he seemed preoccupied." Major Cartwright and Beatrice confirmed they had retired early, claiming no knowledge of the colonel's movements after dinner. Dr. Thorne, who had lingered over coffee in the dining room, said he'd last seen Jeffrey at 9:30, when the colonel excused himself to work. Perkins jotted notes. His brow furrowed. "Right. So, sometime between 10:30 and this morning, something happened. We'll need to search the house for that poisoned source, and I'll need statements from everyone." Hastings, observing the exchange, felt a familiar itch. This was no simple case. The vial, the timing, the locked study, none of it sat right. He had telegraphed Hercule Poirot from the village post office before the constable's arrival, urging his friend to come at once. Poirot, he knew, would see what others missed. As the police began their work, sealing the study and taking photographs, the household dispersed, each person retreating to their own thoughts. Hastings lingered in the hall, where Eleanor approached him. "Arthur, you've seen cases like this before, haven't you, with that detective friend of yours?" Poirot, Hastings said, nodding. "I've sent for him. If anyone can unravel this, it's he." Eleanor's face softened with relief, though her eyes remained wary. "Good. I want answers. Jeffrey didn't do this to himself. I know it." The day dragged on, the rain intensifying, trapping everyone indoors. Hastings took it upon himself to observe the household, noting their interactions. David and Lydia bickered quietly in the drawing room, their voices low but sharp. Frances knelt in the small chapel off the hall, her prayers audible through the door. Rosamond sat in the conservatory, sketching the river, her pencil moving with a nervous energy. The Cartwrights kept to their room, though Major Cartwright emerged periodically to confer with Perkins. Dr. Thorne offered to assist the police, his medical expertise proving useful in cataloguing the scene. By late afternoon, a reply came from Poirot. He would arrive by the evening train. Hastings felt a surge of relief. The little Belgian's methodical mind would bring order to this chaos. Dinner was a subdued affair, served in the dining room despite the tragedy. The absence of the colonel's booming presence left a void, filled only by the clink of cutlery and the patter of rain. Conversation was stilted, each person wary of saying too much. Hastings noted the alibis given earlier, mentally cataloguing them. The times were precise, yet Hastings sensed gaps. Who had been in the study? How had the cyanide been administered? The locked door suggested the colonel had been alone, but Hastings knew better than to trust appearances. As the meal ended, a car's headlights swept across the windows. The tide was low again, allowing passage. Hastings excused himself and hurried to the door, where Hercule Poirot stood, impeccable in his overcoat. His mustache waxed to perfection despite the damp. "Mon ami Hastings," Poirot exclaimed, his green eyes gleaming. "You have summoned me to a tragedy, Nan. Tell me all." Hastings recounted the morning's events, leading Poirot to the drawing room where the family waited. Poirot's entrance was, as always, quietly theatrical. He removed his hat with a flourish, his small frame radiating authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm yet commanding. I am Hercule Poirot, and I am here to uncover the truth of Colonel Linwood's death. I assure you, nothing escapes the little grey cells." Eleanor rose, her relief palpable. "Mr. Poirot, thank you for coming. This is a dreadful business." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, it is always dreadful when life is taken, but rest assured Poirot will find the hand that struck." He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on each face. David's guarded expression, Lydia's forced nonchalance, Francis Pye's frown, Rosamond's quiet intensity, the Cartwright's unease, and Dr. Thorne's studious calm. Hastings knew that Luc Poirot was already cataloguing, analyzing, seeking the first thread to unravel. "First," Poirot said, "I must see the scene of the crime. Constable Perkins, you will permit—" Perkins, flustered by Poirot's reputation, nodded. "Of course, sir. The study's sealed, but I'll take you there." As they moved toward the study, Poirot murmured to Hastings, "This tide, mon ami, it hides many secrets. But, Poirot, he will find them, one by one." The study was as they had left it, save for the police tape. Poirot examined the vial, the desk, the window latches, his movements precise. He noted the time on the colonel's pocket watch, stopped at 11:15 p.m., and the untouched glass of port on the side table. "Curio," Poirot muttered. The poison, it was swift, but how was it delivered? And why this vial, so conveniently in his hand? Hastings felt the familiar thrill of a case. The beginning. The tide might recede, but the truth, he knew, would soon rise. Chapter 3. The interrogations commenced the arrival of Hercule Poirot at Tides. End had infused the somber household with a peculiar energy, a blend of anticipation and dread. As the evening deepened, the rain continued its relentless tattoo upon the windows, and the tide began its inexorable rise once more, whispering against the stone walls of the estate. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, watched with admiration as my friend took command of the situation, his diminutive figure belying the sharpness of his intellect. Poirot had insisted on beginning his inquiries without delay, despite the lateness of the hour. "The mind it is freshest when the shock is still raw," he had murmured to me as we settled in the library, a room adjacent to the sealed study, its shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of pipe tobacco. Constable Perkins, somewhat awed by Poirot's reputation, had agreed to allow the interviews to proceed under his supervision. The body of Colonel Geoffrey Linwood had been removed by the coroner's men earlier that afternoon, destined for a post-mortem examination in March. Preliminary findings suggested cyanide poisoning, administered sometime after 11 o'clock the previous night, but the exact method remained elusive. The vial found in the colonel's hand bore no fingerprint save his own, and the study door, that had been locked from the inside, the key still in the lock. Suicide seemed the obvious conclusion, yet Poirot dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Nan Hastings, a man who speaks of tides turning does not drown himself. There is method here, and malice. We arranged the library for the purpose. A large mahogany table served as Poirot's desk, with chairs positioned opposite for the interviewees. A fire was kindled in the grate to ward off the chill, and lamps cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Poirot seated himself with meticulous care, adjusting his cuffs and stroking his mustache. "We shall begin with the widow," he declared. "Madame Linwood, if you please." Eleanor Linwood entered with the poise of one accustomed to command, though her eyes betrayed the strain of the day. She wore a simple black dress, her grey hair pulled back severely. Poirot rose briefly in greeting, then gestured for her to sit. "Madame," he began, his voice soft yet probing, "my condolences for your loss, but time, it presses. Tell me, if you will, of your husband's state of mind these past days." Eleanor clasped her hands in her lap. Geoffrey was optimistic. The war had been good to his business, but peace brought challenges. He had plans in perhaps selling some land. He mentioned an announcement, something to secure the family's future. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "An enemy's. A man of affairs, he must have made some." She hesitated. "Not that I know of." Geoffrey was shrewd but fair, though. "There were rumors during the war, profiteering they called it, but nothing proven." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "And last night, your movements after dinner?" "As I told the constable, we dined at 8. Geoffrey spoke of his plans. I retired to my room around 11. I heard nothing unusual." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Your room adjoins the colonel's. Nan, did you not hear him in the study below?" "The study is on the ground floor, Monsieur Poirot. My bedroom is above the drawing room." I slept soundly, exhausted from the day's preparations. Poirot made a note on a small pad. "In this vial of poison. Have you seen it before?" "Never. Geoffrey kept no such thing. He was robust. No need for medicines beyond the occasional tonic from Dr. Thorne." After a few more questions, Poirot dismissed her with thanks. As she left, he turned to me. "Observed Hastings. She is composed, but her hands, they tremble. Grief, or something more." Next came David Linwood, his face flushed, a glass of whiskey in hand despite the hour. He slumped into the chair, eyeing Poirot warily. "Monsieur David," Poirot said pleasantly, "you are the heir, I understand." The colonel had no children. David nodded. "That's right. Uncle Geoffrey treated me like a son." I stand to inherit Tide's End, the business everything. A motive, some might say, Poirot observed mildly. David bristled. Now see here, I didn't kill him. I loved the old man. Poirot raised a placating hand. Calm, monsieur. Tell me of your evening. I saw uncle at 10:30 in the hall. He was going to the study. I went upstairs with Lydia. We argued a bit. Money troubles. Then I slept, and this argument. David shifted. Not really. Lydia's extravagant, you see. Actresses, they live for the moment. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you, monsieur? Your war service was heroic. But now, debts perhaps. David's flush deepened. A few uncle was helping, but I'd never, of course, Poirot interjected smoothly. The poison, any idea? None. Maybe he had it for rats in the cellars. The tide brings them in. Poirot noted this, then released him. A young man with needs. He confided to me. But is he clever enough for this? Lydia Linwood followed, her vivacity subdued, though she managed a flirtatious smile. Monsieur Poirot, I've heard of you. Quite the legend. Poirot bowed his head. Flattery, madame, but we deal in facts. Your marriage to David happy. She laughed lightly, as happy as any. War brides, you know he seized the day. And last night, after dinner, I chatted with Beatrice, then upstairs with David around 10:30. He was moody. I read a script until midnight, a script you act still, occasionally. Dreams don't die easily. Poirot probed gently about finances, illicit admissions of strain. Geoffrey was generous, but stingy lately. Said times were tight. As she left, Poirot mused, she's an actress, her emotions. They are performed. But for whom? Frances Linwood entered next, her rosary clicking softly. She sat stiffly, her pinched face set in disapproval. Mademoiselle Frances, Poirot began. You are the Colonel's sister close. In blood, yes, in spirit. Geoffrey strayed from the path. Wealth corrupted him, strayed how his business, shady dealings, and personal sins. I warned him. Poirot's interest sharpened. Sins, affairs. Frances hesitated. Rumors, but the Lord knows. Your evening. In my room by 9, reading. Scriptures. The house was silent. And the poisoned tool of the devil. Perhaps divine justice. Poirot dismissed her thoughtfully. Piety can mask resentment. Hastings. Rosamond was next, her delicate features pale in the lamplight. She spoke softly, her eyes downcast. Mademoiselle Rosamond, Poirot said kindly. You saw the Colonel at 10 in the conservatory. Yes, he was watching the tide. He seemed worried. Said, the flood comes. Rosy, but we'll weather it. Worried about what? I don't know. Family matters. Perhaps your own life. The Wren's brave work. She smiled faintly. It was duty. Now I'm adrift. Poirot noted her nervousness. You retired when? Around 10:15. My room overlooks the river. I heard the tide rising. Nothing else. As she departed, Poirot frowned. She hides something, fear or guilt. Major Lionel Cartwright followed, his military bearing intact. Dashed bad business. This, he boomed. Major Poirot queried. Your association with the Colonel. Wartime partners. Supplies, contracts. Stayed on to advise post-war motives. Disagreements. None. Geoffrey was sound. We had plans, new ventures. His alibi. Retired at 9 with Beatrice. Poirot pressed on finances. He owed you money. A trifle. Nothing worth murder. Beatrice Cartwright came last among the family, her mousy demeanor accentuated by nerves. She fluttered into the chair, twisting a handkerchief. Madame Beatrice, Poirot soothed. Fear not, your evening. With Lydia after dinner, then bed by 9. Lionel read aloud. I slept poorly. The tide frightens me. Anything unusual? A creak. Around 11 perhaps, but old houses creak. Poirot noted this, and the Colonel, a good man though, strict with money. Finally, Dr. Elias Thorne, composed behind his spectacles. Dr. Poirot said, you treated the family. The Colonel's health. Excellent. No poisons in my kit. Cyanides not medicinal. Your evening. Lingered over coffee till 9:30. Saw Geoffrey leave for the study. Retired to my guest room. Any prescriptions? Non-relevant. Poirot leaned back. One thing. The veal. Thorne shook his head. No. As Thorne left, Poirot sighed. All have alibis. Yet inconsistencies lurk. The creak at 11. The watch stopped at 11:15. And the port glass untouched. But perhaps not, I ventured. Poison in the port. Possible. Hastings, but how? With the door locked. The interviews concluded near midnight. Poirot rose, stretching. Tomorrow, we search clues, hide in details. As we retired, the tide peaked, flooding the grounds. Secrets, I thought, like the river, would soon overflow. Chapter 4. The Threads of Suspicion. The morning following Hercule Poirot's arrival at Tide's End dawned with a deceptive calm, the rain having softened to a fine mist that clung to the windows like a veil. The tide had receded once more, leaving the grounds sodden and the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and river mud. Inside the Georgian mansion, the atmosphere was thick with unease, as if the walls themselves absorbed the secrets of its inhabitants. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, felt the weight of the tragedy more keenly now, knowing that Poirot's keen mind was at work. Sifting through the tangle of alibis and motives that had emerged the previous night, Poirot, ever punctual, was already in the dining room when I descended, sipping a tisane with an air of serene concentration. His impeccable suit and polished shoes contrasted sharply with the disheveled appearance of the household, many of whom had slept poorly. Bon mat, Hastings, he greeted, his green eyes bright. Today, we observe and we probe the little grey cells. They are restless. Constable Perkins had returned with a small team, including a deer-faced inspector named Hargreaves, who seemed less than pleased by Poirot's presence. "We've got our methods, Mr. Poirot," Hargreaves said gruffly, adjusting his tie. "Suicides. The simplest explanation: cyanide in the vial, door locked, no signs of a struggle." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Simplicity, Inspector, is often the mask of complexity. Permit me to assist, and we shall see what the truth reveals." Hargreaves grunted but allowed Poirot to accompany him to the study, which had been unsealed for further examination. I followed, noting the meticulous care with which Poirot surveyed the room. The oak desk, now cleared of the colonel's body, bore the ink-stained blotter, a few scattered papers, and the untouched glass of port. The vial of cyanide had been taken for analysis, but Poirot lingered over the spot where it had lain. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing to the desk's edge. "A faint scratch, here barely visible. Recent, perhaps, and this chair slightly askew, not aligned with the desk as a man of the colonel's habits would keep it." I frowned. "You think someone moved it, perhaps, or someone stood here beside him?" Poirot knelt, examining the floorboards. "No footprints. Alas, the carpet is too thick. But the window, ... He crossed to the mullioned window, testing the latch. Locked, as expected. Yet the tide, it was high last night. No one could approach from outside." Hargreaves, impatient, interjected. "We've checked the windows and doors, all secure. The key was in the lock, inside. If it's not suicide, how'd the killer get in and out?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, Inspector, is the question. But first, we must understand the man. What was he working on?" The papers on the desk were financial documents, ledgers, contracts, and a draft will. Poirot scanned them, his brow furrowing. "Mon Dieu, the colonel was planning a significant change. This will, it names David as primary heir, but with conditions. And here, a letter to his solicitor, dated yesterday, requesting a meeting to discuss new arrangements." "New arrangements," I echoed. "What kind?" "Unclear, Hastings. But it suggests a motive. Someone perhaps feared losing their inheritance." We moved to the library, where Poirot requested the household gather for further questions. The family and guests assembled reluctantly, their faces etched with fatigue and suspicion. Eleanor sat erect, her hands folded tightly. David slouched, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Lydia's eyes darted nervously, while Frances clutched her rosary, murmuring softly. Rosamond stood by the window, gazing at the river, her expression unreadable. Major Cartwright and Beatrice sat close together, his hand resting protectively on hers. Dr. Thorne adjusted his spectacles, his demeanor calm but watchful. Poirot began with a disarming smile. "Mesdames, messieurs, I seek only the truth. Let us revisit last night. Madame Linwood, you mentioned the colonel's optimism, yet his papers suggest worried it's perhaps." Eleanor stiffened. "Geoffrey never discussed debts with me. His business was sound, yet strained." Poirot countered gently. "Major Cartwright, you advised him. Were there financial troubles?" Cartwright cleared his throat. "Minor cash flow issues. Post-war markets are unpredictable. We were exploring new venture shipping, perhaps." Poirot turned to David. "Monsieur David, as heir you stood to gain much. Were you aware of these new arrangements?" David's jaw tightened. "No, Uncle never said a word. If he was cutting me out, I'd have fought it, but not like this." Lydia interjected, her voice sharp. "David's no killer. He's too soft for it." Poirot's gaze shifted to her. "Madame Lydia, your husband's debts, they were significant." She flushed. "Nothing we couldn't manage. Geoffrey promised to help." Frances snorted. "Worldly promises lead to ruin." Poirot ignored the interruption, focusing on Rosamond. "Mademoiselle Rosamond, you saw the colonel at 10. He spoke of weathering a flood. Was it only the tide he feared?" Rosamond hesitated, her fingers twisting a lock of hair. I think he meant the family," he said. "We must hold together, Rosie." "Hold together," Poirot repeated, thoughtfully. "And you, Dr. Thorne, you prescribed no poisons. Yet cyanide is not common. Could it have come from the estate?" Thorne frowned. "Possibly. The gardens use chemicals for pests. I'd need to check the stores." Poirot nodded. "We shall do so." "And Madame Beatrice, you heard a creak at 11 from where?" Beatrice flushed, glancing at her husband. I'm not sure. The hall. Perhaps I was half asleep." Major Cartwright patted her hand. "Old houses, Mr. Poirot. Creaks are common." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral. "But timing is not." After the group dispersed, Poirot requested a tour of the grounds, accompanied by Perkins and me. The tide was low, exposing the muddy banks and the jetty where boats docked. We visited the garden shed where Frances kept her supplies. Among the tools and fertilizers, Poirot found a small locked cabinet, Francis summoned, unlocked it reluctantly, revealing various chemicals, including a jar labeled potassium cyanide for pest control. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured. Accessible, yet not to all. Who has the key? Mademoiselle Francis. Only me, she said, her voice tight. And Geoffrey, for emergencies. Poirot examined the lock, noting its simplicity. A key easily borrowed or copied back in the house. Poirot requested to see the colonel's bedroom adjacent. To Eleanor's, it was orderly with military precision. A neatly made bed, a wardrobe of tailored suits, and a bedside table with a decanter of port and a single glass. Poirot sniffed the decanter, his expression inscrutable. No almonds here, he said, but the study's port glass, perhaps we test it. Hargreaves, growing testy, agreed to send the glass for analysis. You're chasing shadows, Mr. Poirot. The vial's enough evidence. Poirot smiled enigmatically. Shadows, Inspector, often reveal the shape of truth. As evening fell, Poirot and I retired to the library to review his notes. He sketched a timeline on a sheet of paper, marking each person's movements. 8 p.m. Dinner ends. Colonel speaks of announcement. 9 p.m. Francis retires, praying. Cartwrights retire. 9:30 p.m. Dr. Thorne sees Colonel leave dining room. 10 p.m. Rosamond sees Colonel in conservatory. 10:30 p.m. David sees Colonel in hall, heading to study. 11 p.m. Beatrice hears creak. Eleanor retires. 11:15 p.m. Colonel's watch stops. Morning, body found, vial in hand. Observe, Hastings, Poirot said, tapping the paper. The window is narrow between 10:30 and 11:15, yet the door was locked, the key inside. How perhaps he drank the poison earlier, and it took time to act. Nan cyanide is swift minutes, not hours. No, it was administered in the study, but by whom and how? I ventured. The creak. Beatrice heard someone in the hall. Possible or a distraction. We must also consider the will. If the colonel planned to change it, who stood to lose? I thought of David, the heir, and Lydia, reliant on his inheritance. Francis, bitter over her allowance. Rosamond, perhaps hiding a deeper grievance. Even the Cartwrights, tied to the colonel's business, might fear a shift. Poirot rose, adjusting his tie. Tomorrow, we dig deeper. Motives, Hastings, they are like the tide, rising to reveal what lies beneath. As we parted for the night, the river surged outside, its rhythm a reminder of secrets yet to surface. Chapter 5. The red herring surfaced the fifth day at tide's end, broke with a pale sun struggling through the clouds, casting a watery light over the Thames estuary. The tide was low, exposing the muddy flats where gulls wheeled and cried, their harsh calls echoing the tension within the house. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, felt the weight of the investigation pressing harder now, as Hercule Poirot's meticulous probing began to stir the household's carefully guarded secrets. The arrival of Inspector Hargreaves with new information from the coroner's report had set the stage for further scrutiny, and I sensed that Poirot was preparing to cast his net wider, seeking the elusive thread that would unravel the mystery of Colonel Geoffrey Linwood's death. Breakfast was a strained affair, served in the dining room with its long mahogany table and heavy silverware. The family and guests ate in near silence, the clink of porcelain and the occasional cough punctuating the unease. Eleanor Linwood presided with her usual dignity, though her eyes were shadowed with fatigue. David and Lydia sat apart, their earlier bickering replaced by a chilly distance. Frances murmured prayers over her toast, while Rosamond picked at her food, her gaze fixed on the river beyond the window. Major Cartwright and Beatrice spoke in low tones, and Dr. Thorne, ever composed, read a medical journal between sips of tea. Poirot entered as coffee was served, his demeanor as polished as ever, his moustache gleaming under the chandelier's light. Madame et Messieurs, he announced, I have spoken with Inspector Hargreaves, and we have news. The coroner confirms cyanide poisoning, administered shortly before death, likely between 11 and 11:15 last night. The glass of port on the colonel's desk, it contained traces of cyanide. This, it seems, was the vehicle of death. A murmur rippled through the room. David stubbled out his cigarette, his face pale. The port, but it was untouched. Poirot raised a hand. Untouched in appearance, monsieur. But a sip perhaps was enough. The vial in his hand, it may be a distraction, Nan. A red herring to suggest suicide. Inspector Hargreaves, standing by the door, cleared his throat. We're treating this as murder now. The vial's fingerprints are only the colonel's, but the port glass has none, not even his. Wiped clean. Likely Eleanor's voice was sharp. Wiped. Then someone was in the study with him. Precisement, Poirot said, his eyes scanning the group. And yet, the door was locked. The key inside. A puzzle, is it not? Hargreaves, warming to his role, pointed a finger at David. You, Mr. Linwood, you were the last to see him, at 10:30, and you stand to inherit. Care to explain? David leapt to his feet, his chair scraping. I told you, I didn't go near the study after that. I was upstairs with Lydia. Lydia nodded, though her eyes flickered. He was with me, Inspector, W.E. argued, then went to bed. Hargreaves snorted. Convenient. And those debts of yours? We've had a word with your bank. You're in deep, Mr. Linwood. Killing your uncle would solve that nicely. The accusation hung in the air. and I saw the group's reactions. Eleanor's lips tightened. Frances crossed herself, Rosamond flinched, and Major Cartwright's mustache twitched. Beatrice gasped, clutching her husband's arm, while Dr. Thorne adjusted his spectacles, his expression unreadable. Poirot intervened smoothly. "Inspector, let us not rush to judgment. Motives, they are many, but evidence it must guide us. Monsieur David is a suspect, but so are others. Let us explore." Hargreaves grumbled but stepped back, allowing Poirot to take the lead. "I wish to examine the household's movements further," Poirot said, "and to search for more clues. Madame Linwood, may we inspect the Colonel's papers in greater detail?" Eleanor nodded. "Of course, anything to find the truth." Poirot and I, accompanied by Constable Perkins, returned to the study. The room felt colder now, its air heavy with the memory of death. Poirot resumed his examination, focusing on the desk's contents. Among the papers, he found a ledger detailing recent transactions, large sums paid to an unnamed party, marked only as C. Curio. Poirot murmured. "Payments. Substantial, yet vague. To whom, I wonder?" I suggested. "Cartwright. He was the Colonel's business partner. Possible Hastings, or a creditor perhaps. We must inquire." Poirot also found a small notebook in the desk drawer, its pages filled with the Colonel's cramped handwriting. It contained notes on his business dealings, including a cryptic entry: "Must settle with F before flood rises." F. I asked Francis for a code, Poirot said. The Colonel was cautious. "This flood," it echoes Rosamond's words. A metaphor, perhaps, for a crisis. We moved to the garden shed again, where Poirot examined the cyanide jar more closely. It was half empty, the seal intact but for a small puncture, as if a syringe had been used to extract the poison. "Clever," Poirot said. "No need to open the jar. A needle, and the deed is done." Back in the house, Poirot requested private interviews with each suspect, beginning with Major Cartwright. The Major entered the library with his usual bluster, but his eyes were wary. Major Poirot began. "These payments marked C. in the Colonel's ledger you are doing." Cartwright flushed. "Business dealings, Mr. Poirot, loans, investments, all above board. The sums are large, and your prolonged stay here necessary. My wife enjoys the country, and Geoffrey valued my advice." Poirot nodded, unconvinced. "And the night of the murder you heard nothing?" "As I said, we were in bed by 9. Beatrice mentioned a creak, but nothing more." Beatrice was next, her nervousness palpable. Madame Poirot said gently, "This creak at 11, where exactly?" She twisted her handkerchief. I think from the hall, or perhaps the stairs. I was so tired." "And your husband's business with the Colonel?" "He owed money. A small amount. Geoffrey always paid eventually." Poirot's questions to Frances were met with icy reserve. "Mademoiselle, this notebook mentions F. and settling matters. Your brother's words." Frances' lips thinned. "I know nothing of it. Geoffrey never confided in me. The cyanide in your shed used recently. For rats, months ago. I keep it locked." Rosamond followed, her quiet intensity drawing Poirot's focus. "Mademoiselle, the Colonel spoke of a flood. Did he confide more?" She hesitated. "He was worried about money. Said someone was pressing him who he didn't say. I thought perhaps David." Dr. Thorne was last, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Doctor, you know of cyanide's uses. Could it be extracted discreetly?" "Certainly," Thorne replied. "A syringe would suffice. But I had no access to it. And the Colonel's health? Any signs of distress?" "None physical. Mentally, he was under strain. Business, I assume." As the interviews concluded, Hargreaves pulled Poirot aside. "We've got our man, Mr. Poirot. David Linwood's debts, his presence near the study, it's him." Poirot shook his head. "Too obvious, Inspector. The red herring. It is designed to mislead. Consider the port glass wiped clean. A careful mind at work, not an impulsive one." That afternoon, Poirot requested a map of the house, sketching the layout with Perkins' help. The study was on the ground floor, accessible from the hall, with a side door to the conservatory locked, but with a key in the kitchen. "A second entrance," Poirot noted, "and the hall open to all." I ventured. "Someone could have slipped in, poisoned the point, and left." But the timing tight, and the vial placed in his hand, a theatrical touch. As evening approached, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room. "I sense deception," he declared. "Someone knows more than they say. Speak now, or the truth will find you." Silence met his words, but I saw Lydia's fingers tighten on her armrest, and Rosamond's eyes flicker toward David. The tide was rising outside, and with it the pressure within. Poirot turned to me later, in the library. "Hastings, the clues multiply, but the picture is blurred. The ledger, the notebook, the cyanide, the core pieces of a puzzle. We must find the pattern." I nodded, feeling the case's complexity. David seemed the obvious suspect, yet Poirot's instincts pointed elsewhere. The red herrings were plentiful, but the truth, I knew, was close. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. The sixth day at tide's end brought a restless energy, as if the house itself was straining under the weight of its secrets. The morning was crisp, the tide low, revealing the Thames estuary's muddy banks, where The river's relentless rhythm seemed to mock the stasis within the mansion. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, felt the investigation's momentum building. Driven by Hercule Poirot's unerring focus on the smallest details, the revelation that the cyanide had been in the Colonel's port glass, wiped clean of fingerprints, had shifted the case firmly to murder, and Poirot was now intent on finding the subtle contradictions that would betray the killer. After a hurried breakfast, Poirot requested a private meeting with Inspector Hargreaves and Constable Perkins in the library. The room, with its towering bookshelves and lingering scent of old leather, had become our unofficial headquarters. Poirot sat at the mahogany table, his notebook open, a pencil poised with precision. "Messieurs," he began, his voice calm but insistent, "we must consider the mechanics of this crime. The port glass cyanide within, yet no fingerprints. The vial in the Colonel's hand, his prints alone. The door, locked from within. These are not accidents, but a design. We must find the detail that cracks this facade." Hargreaves, his skepticism softening under Poirot's persistence, nodded. "The coroner's report pins death between 11 and 11:15, based on the body's state and that stopwatch. But how the poison got into the glass, with the room locked, beats me." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Beats you perhaps, but not Hercule Poirot. Let us examine the study once more, with fresh eyes." We returned to the study, its atmosphere still heavy with the memory of Colonel Linwood's death. The oak desk stood, as before, the blotter stained, the chair slightly askew. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his gloved hands tracing the desk's edge where he had noted the faint scratch. "This mark," he said, producing a small magnifying glass. "It is not random. Observe, shallow but precise, as if a metal object grazed it." I peered over his shoulder. "A key, perhaps, or a tool. Possible, Hastings. Or something carried by the killer, a ring, a watch, a cufflink. We must look for such an item." Poirot turned his attention to the port glass, now in police custody but replaced by a photograph for reference. The glass was wiped clean, yet the Colonel drank from it. Why wipe it? To hide whose hands touched it last? Perkins ventured. "Could someone have poisoned the decanter earlier?" Poirot replied. The decanter in the Colonel's bedroom was clean, and the study's glass held only a small amount of port. The poison was added in the study, moments before death. Hargreaves frowned. "But the door was locked. No one could have got in without the key." Poirot smiled enigmatically. "Unless, Inspector, the key was not the only way. The conservatory door, its key is kept in the kitchen. Let us see." We moved to the kitchen, a bustling space where the cook and maids were preparing luncheon. The conservatory key hung on a hook near the pantry, easily accessible. Poirot examined it, noting its worn brass surface. This key, it could have been used, and returned before anyone noticed. Back in the study, Poirot tested the conservatory door's lock. It turned smoothly, but the door showed no signs of forced entry. "Curio," he murmured. "No scratches, no damage. Yet this door offers a second path." Our next task was to search the suspects' rooms, with Eleanor's permission. Hargreaves assigned Perkins to oversee, ensuring nothing was disturbed improperly. Poirot began with David and Lydia's room, a spacious chamber overlooking the river. Among David's belongings, Poirot found a silver cigarette case, its edge slightly dented. "Interesting," he said, comparing it to the desk's scratch. "Not a perfect match, but we keep it in mind." Lydia's dressing table held cosmetics, scripts, and a small sewing kit with a needle and thread. Poirot paused over the needle, his brow furrowing. "A syringe, perhaps, or a substitute." The cyanide jar had a puncture. Frances' room, in her cottage on the estate, was austere with a Bible and gardening journals. Poirot examined her keyring, which included the shed key. "No duplicates visible," he noted, "but keys can be copied." Rosamond's room was sparse, with sketchbooks filled with river scenes. A locked diary caught Poirot's eye. "Mademoiselle, may we see this?" he asked when she was summoned. Rosamond hesitated, then unlocked it. The entries were brief, mentioning the Colonel's kindness but also his secrets weighing heavy. One line read, "He fears betrayal, but from whom?" Poirot made a note, his expression thoughtful. The Cartwrights' guest room yielded little military medals, a few letters, and Beatrice's embroidery. Major Cartwright's watch, however, had a metal strap with a sharp edge. Another possibility. For the scratch, Poirot said Dr. Thorne's guest room contained medical texts and a small case of instruments, including syringes, purely for emergencies, Thorne explained. "I carry no poisons." Poirot nodded, but I saw the wheels turning. "Everyone has something to hide," he murmured to me later. "But one detail stands out: the diary. Rosamond knows more than she says." That afternoon, Poirot requested a private talk with Rosamond in the conservatory, its glass walls steaming with the damp air. She sat nervously, her hands folded. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began gently, "your diary speaks of betrayal. What did the Colonel fear?" Rosamond's eyes filled with tears. He said someone close was deceiving him. He didn't name them, but he was angry. I thought it was about money, David's debts, or perhaps Major Cartwright's loans. Angry enough to change his will. I don't know. He only said he'd settle things before it was too late. Poirot pressed. "And the night he died, you saw him at 10. Anything else?" She hesitated, then whispered, I heard footsteps in the hall later near 11. I didn't look out. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of ... everything. The house feels wrong. Poirot thanked her, his expression grave. As we left the conservatory, he said, her fear is genuine, Hastings. But is it of the killer, or of being discovered? Later, in the library, Poirot reviewed his timeline, adding Rosamond's footsteps. 8 p.m. Dinner ends. Colonel speaks of announcement. 9 p.m. Francis and Cartwrights retire. 9:30 p.m. Dr. Thorne sees Colonel leave dining room. 10 p.m. Rosamond sees Colonel in conservatory. 10:30 p.m. David sees Colonel in hall, heading to study. 11 p.m. Beatrice hears creak. Rosamond hears footsteps. Eleanor retires. 11:15 p.m. Colonel's watch stops. Morning, body found, vial in hand. The footsteps, Poirot said, tapping the paper. They align with Beatrice's creak. Someone moved in the house near the study, and this scratch on the desk is a clue. Hastings, small thing, but significant, I ventured. Could it be the murderous cufflink or watch caught on the desk precisement? We must watch for such an item. And the conservatory. Dorrit's key is too convenient. Someone used it, I think, to enter and leave. Hargreaves joined us, his face grim. We've checked the Colonel's solicitor. He confirms a meeting was planned to revise the will. David's inheritance was to be reduced, with funds redirected to a trust for Rosamond and Francis. I gasped. That's motive for David. Poirot shook his head. Or for others, fearing loss. The net widens. Hastings. As evening fell, the tide rose, flooding the grounds. Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room, his presence commanding silence. A detail has emerged, he said. The Colonel planned to change his will. This changes motives. I urge you speak now, if you know anything. Lydia's face paled, and David's jaw clenched. Francis' rosary clicked faster, and Rosamond looked away. The Cartwrights exchanged glances, and Thorne remained impassive. Poirot's eyes missed nothing. The truth, he said softly, it will not stay submerged. As we retired, I felt the case tightening. The scratch, the footsteps, the will, clues, but Poirot's genius would weave them into a net to catch the killer. Chapter 7. The Lies Beneath the Surface. The seventh day at tide's end dawned with a heavy mist rolling in from the Thames, shrouding the estate in a ghostly veil that seemed to mirror the secrets lurking within its walls. The tide was high, the river lapping at the stone terrace, its rhythmic surge a constant reminder of the forces beyond human control. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, felt the investigation's tension mounting, as Hercule Poirot's relentless pursuit of the truth began to expose cracks in the household's carefully constructed facades. The revelation of the Colonel's plan will change, coupled with the cyanide-tainted port glass and the mysterious desk scratch, had stirred unease, and I sensed that hidden truths, affairs, grudges, or financial schemes were about to surface. Breakfast was a grim affair, the dining room's grandeur overshadowed by suspicion. Eleanor Linwood, her face drawn, presided with forced composure. David and Lydia barely spoke, their earlier distance now a chasm. Frances clutched her rosary, her lips moving silently, while Rosamond stared at her untouched plate, her eyes distant. Major Cartwright and Beatrice whispered together, their glances darting nervously, and Dr. Thorne maintained his scholarly calm, though I noted a flicker of unease when Poirot entered. Poirot, impeccable as ever, sipped his tisane with serene focus. Mise et miss, he announced. Today we delve deeper. Lies have been told small, perhaps, but they hide larger truths. I ask for honesty, or the consequences. They will be severe. Inspector Hargreaves, present with Constable Perkins, shifted impatiently. We've got enough on David Linwood, he said. Debts, motive, and he was near the study at 10:30. Let's bring him in. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Inspector. The obvious path is often the false one. Let us explore the shadows first. After breakfast, Poirot requested a private meeting with Lydia in the library. She entered with a practiced smile, her actress's poise barely masking her nerves. Monsieur Poirot, she said, settling into a chair. This is all so dreadful. How can I help? Madame Poirot began, his tone gentle but piercing. Your marriage to Monsieur David is strained. Nan. Financial troubles, perhaps, or ... other matters. Lydia's smile faltered. Money's tight. Yes, David's reckless with it. But we manage. Poirot leaned forward, and the Colonel's generosity had waned recently. She hesitated. He was ... stricter lately. Said we needed to stand on our own, and you, madame, your ambitions as an actress costly, I imagine. Did you seek funds elsewhere? Her eyes flashed. What are you implying? I loved Geoffrey like a father. Poirot's gaze held hers. Love, madame, does not preclude secrets. The night of the murder you argued with David. About what money? As always. He was drunk, moody. I went to bed alone. Yet you confirmed his alibi. She flushed. I meant, after the argument. He was in our room. Poirot made a note, his expression unreadable. And this sewing kit in your room, the needle. Could it pierce a jar's seal? Lydia's face paled. I use it for mending, nothing else. As she left, Poirot murmured to me, she lies, Hastings. Not about everything, but enough. Next, Poirot summoned Major Cartwright. The Major's bluster seemed diminished, his mustache twitching as he sat. Major Poirot said, "These payments marked C. In the Colonel's ledger your loans." Cartwright nodded reluctantly. "Business ventures. Geoffrey owed, with me for wartime contracts. He was repaying, slowly. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yet you stayed on, a guest for months." "Why, Beatrice likes it here, and I was helping with new planned shipping exports. And if the Colonel changed his will, reducing funds, your loans repaid." Cartwright's face reddened. "I trusted him, he'd have settled." Poirot dismissed him, noting, "A man in debt to another, yet dependent, a dangerous combination." Frances was next, her piety a shield. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "the Colonel's notebook mentions F. and settling matters you, perhaps." "I told you, I know nothing," she snapped. "Geoffrey ignored me, always. Yet you resented his wealth. Your allowance was small." Her eyes flashed. "I live simply, as God intends. Unlike some, and the cyanide in your shed accessible to you. I keep it locked. Only Geoffrey had another key." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And where is his key now?" Frances faltered. "I don't know. He kept it in his desk." After she left, Poirot and I searched the study again. In a drawer, we found a key ring with several keys, including one matching the shed's lock. So Poirot said, the Colonel's key, but wasn't used. Rosamond's interview was tense. Her delicate features were taut, her hands trembling. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "your diary speaks of betrayal. Did the Colonel suspect someone specific?" She bit her lip. "He hinted at disloyalty, someone close. I thought, maybe Lydia. He didn't approve of her spending. And the footsteps you heard at 11. I don't know who." "I stayed in my room," Poirot pressed. "You fear something? Tell me." Tears welled in her eyes. I found a letter, in the conservatory, the day before he died. It was hidden under a pot. Addressed to Geoffrey, unsigned, demanding money." Poirot's eyes lit up. "A blackmail letter. Where is it now?" "I burned it. I was scared." Poirot sighed. "A pity, mademoiselle, but this is vital." "Who knew you found it?" "No one, I swear." As she left, Poirot turned to me. "Blackmail. Hastings. A new thread. The Colonel was pressed, and someone knew his secrets. Dr. Thorne was last, his calm unruffled. Dr. Poirot said you knew the Colonel's health. Any signs of poison before?" "None. He was robust, though stressed." "And your syringes, could one extract cyanide?" Thorne frowned. "Theoretically, yes, but mine are accounted for." Poirot nodded, dismissing him. A man of science, yet he watches closely. Later in the library, Poirot reviewed his notes, adding the blackmail letter to his timeline. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point, the 8th day at tide's end, was marked by a restless undercurrent, as if the very air within the Georgian mansion vibrated with the strain of secrets teetering on the edge of exposure. The tide was low, revealing the Thames estuary's muddy banks, where the river's slow retreat seemed to echo the gradual unraveling of the household's composure. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, felt the investigation reaching a critical juncture, as Hercule Poirot probing had begun to chip away at the facades of the suspects. The revelation of a blackmail letter, now destroyed, had added a new layer to the mystery of Colonel Geoffrey Linwood's murder, and I sensed that someone was about to crack under the pressure. The morning began with a somber breakfast, the dining room's heavy silence broken only by the clink of cutlery and the distant cry of gulls. Eleanor Linwood, her face etched with grief and resolve, presided over the table, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. David and Lydia sat apart, their silence a wall between them. Frances clutched her rosary, her prayers more fervent than ever, while Rosamond's eyes were red-rimmed as if she had wept through the night. Major Cartwright and Beatrice whispered nervously, and Dr. Thorne, ever composed, sipped his coffee with a detached air. Poirot, entering with his usual precision, surveyed the group with a calm that belied the intensity of his purpose. "Madame et messieurs," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "We approach the truth. A blackmail letter, hidden and destroyed, suggests someone in this house held power over the Colonel. I urge you speak now, before the tide of justice overtakes you." Inspector Hargreaves, standing by the door with Constable Perkins, shifted impatiently. "We're closing in, Mr. Poirot. That letter points to motive. David Linwood's debts make him prime suspect." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Motive, Inspector, is not proof. Let us seek the truth in the hearts of those here." After breakfast, Poirot requested a private meeting with Eleanor in the library. She entered, her posture rigid, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Madame Poirot began, his tone gentle yet incisive. "You loved your husband, yet he kept secrets. This blackmail letter, did you know of it?" Eleanor's hands clenched. "No, Monsieur Poirot. Geoffrey never spoke of such things, but he was troubled lately. Distant. Troubled by what? His will, perhaps, or betrayal." She hesitated, then whispered, "He mentioned a disloyalty once, weeks ago. I thought it was Cartwright, perhaps, but he wouldn't say more. And the night he died, you heard nothing." "Nothing. I was asleep by 11, but... Her voice broke. "I should have known something was wrong. He was so restless. Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. Her grief is real, he said to me, but so is her ignorance, or so she claims. Next, Poirot summoned David, whose haggard appearance suggested a sleepless night. Monsieur David, Poirot said, this blackmail letter, were you aware of it? David's jaw tightened. No, if someone was squeezing Uncle, they didn't. Tell me. Your debts, they pressed him. Did you ever threaten him? David's eyes flashed. Never. I begged. Maybe, but that's all. He was going to help us, Lydia and me. And yet he planned to cut your inheritance. A motive, Nan. David slumped, his voice breaking. I didn't know. If I'd known, I'd have talked to him, not this. As David left, Poirot murmured, his distress seems genuine, Hastings. But is it guilt or fear? Lydia was. Next, her actresses poised, crumbling. She twisted a handkerchief, her eyes darting. Madame Poirot said, you knew the Colonel disapproved of your spending. Did you seek other means to fund your ambitions? Her face paled. I asked Geoffrey for help. Yes, he refused lately. But blackmail, never. And this letter Rosamond found, did you see it? No. Her voice rose, then faltered. I mean, I don't know anything about it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. You hesitate, madame. What do you hide? Lydia's composure shattered, tears spilling. I heard something that night, not just footsteps. Voices, in the hall, near 11. I didn't tell before because ... I was afraid for David. Voices. Poirot leaned forward. Who's? I couldn't tell. A man and a woman, arguing softly. I thought it was David and someone, but he was with me. Poirot made a note. A crucial detail. Madame White, keep it silent. I didn't want to make things worse for him, she sobbed. He's in enough trouble. As she left, Poirot turned to me. I crack Hastings. Voices at 11 and another piece of the puzzle. Frances entered next, her face set in disapproval. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, this blackmail, you know of your brother's troubles. Geoffrey was a sinner, she snapped. If someone blackmailed him, he deserved it. A harsh judgment. Did you know of this letter? No, but I warned him his wealth invited corruption. And the cyanide in your shed, could someone have taken it? Her eyes narrowed. The key was with me. Only Geoffrey had another. Poirot dismissed her, noting her righteousness hides bitterness. But is it murderous? Rosamond was summoned again, her fragility evident. Mademoiselle, Poirot said softly, you burned the letter. Why? I was scared, she whispered. It was angry, demanding money for silence. I didn't want to cause trouble. What did it say, exactly? Something about exposing his shame unless he paid. It was typed, no signature. Poirot's eyes lit up. Typed, interesting, and you told no one? No, I ... I regretted burning it after. As she left, Poirot said, her fear is real, but her silence protective or complicit. Major Cartwright and Beatrice followed their unease. Palpable, Major? Poirot asked. This blackmail, did the Colonel mention threats? No, Cartwright said gruffly. He was worried about business, that's all. And you, Madame Beatrice, you heard a creak. Now we hear her voices. Did you hear them? Beatrice flushed. Maybe. I thought it was the house settling. I was so tired. Poirot nodded, dismissing them. They guard each other, Hastings, but why? Dr. Thorne was last, his calm unshaken. Dr. Poirot said, voices at 11, did you hear them? No, Thorne replied. I was asleep by 10, and blackmail. Any hint in the Colonel's health or mood? He was stressed, as I said. Business, perhaps, or family. Poirot thanked him, then turned to me. The voices, Hastings, they confirm movement near the study, and this typed letter a modern touch, suggesting calculation. Later in the library, Poirot updated his timeline, adding Lydia's revelation. Chapter 10. The reveal. The drawing room of Pennington Hall was suffused with an air of taut anticipation, as though the very walls held their breath. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn against the late afternoon sun, casting the room in a soft, amber glow from the chandelier above. The gathered company: Lady Eleanor Pennington, her son Charles, Dr. Harold Whitmore, Miss Clara Henshaw, Mr. Roland Baxter, and the nervous Miss Emily Tate sat in a semicircle of her backed chairs, their faces a tableau of apprehension, defiance, and guarded curiosity. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his honest features betraying a flicker of unease as he glanced at his friend. Hercule Poirot. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. His black patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustache was perfectly waxed, and his green eyes sparkled with a quiet intensity that belied the gravity of the moment. In his hands he held a sheet of paper, a list of notes scribbled in his precise, elegant hand. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint ticking of the mantel clock, which read precisely for 47 p.m. Mesdames, Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice calm yet resonant, each syllable carefully enunciated. We are gathered here to bring clarity to the darkness that has fallen upon Pennington Hall. The death of Sir Reginald Pennington was no accident, no mere misfortune of the tides, as some would have us believe. It was murder, deliberate, calculated, and executed with a cunning that sought to deceive. But Hercule Poirot does not permit deception to triumph over the little grey cells. A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, her gloved hands clutching her handkerchief. Charles shifted in his seat, his jaw set, while Dr. Whitmore's fingers drummed nervously on the arm of his chair. Clara Henshaw's sharp eyes darted to Poirot, and Roland Baxter's face remained impassive, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped his cane. Emily Tate, pale and trembling, stared at the floor. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. "Let us reconstruct the events of that fateful night, the 14th of August, 1945, when Sir Reginald was found dead at the edge of the cliffs, his body broken upon the rocks below, the sea claiming him as its own. The police, they conclude a fall, a tragic misstep in the fog. But I, Poirot, I see what others do not. I see the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the threads of human motive woven into a tapestry of crime." He paced slowly, his steps measured, his gaze sweeping over the assembled company. "First, let us consider the alibis, so carefully provided. Lady Eleanor, you were in your room, reading, at 10:30 p.m., when Sir Reginald was last seen alive. Charles, you claim to have been in the billiard room with Mr. Baxter until 11 p.m. Dr. Whitmore, you were in your study, reviewing patient notes. Miss Henshaw, you were in the library, cataloguing books. Miss Tate, you were in the kitchen, preparing a late tray for Sir Reginald and Mr. Baxter. You confirm Charles's alibi, yet you add that you retired to your room shortly after, all so neat, so precise. Too precise, perhaps." Poirot paused, his eyes narrowing. "But there is one detail that does not fit. The pocket watch of Sir Reginald, found shattered on the rocks, stopped at 10:42 p.m. This suggests he Laura was pushed at that precise moment. Yet the tide, Ms. Amos, the tide tells a different story. The sea was at its highest at 10:15 p.m., and by 10:42 it was receding. Had Sir Reginald fallen at 10:42, his body would not have been swept so far out, nor would it have been found in the state it was. No, the body was moved, placed upon the rocks after death to suggest a fall. The watch was broken deliberately, to mislead." A gasp escaped Emily Tate, and Charles's face darkened. Poirot continued, undeterred. "Now, let us examine the clues. The cigarette case, found in Sir Reginald's study, bearing the initials CH, not Charles Pennington, as the police assumed, but Clara Miss Henshaw, you denied owning such a case, yet I observed your hesitation when questioned. And then, the fragment of green silk, caught on a thorn near the cliff path, matching the scarf you wore that evening. You were there, were you not? At the cliffs." Clara's face paled, but her voice was steady. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was in the library. I know nothing of the cliffs." Poirot smiled faintly, a predator's smile. "And yet, the library window was found ajar, though you claim to have closed it. The mud on your shoes, Miss Henshaw, was of the same composition as that found near the cliffs. You were there, and you were not alone." He turned to Charles. "Monsieur Charles, your temper is well known, as is your resentment toward your father, who threatened to You were seen arguing with him at 9:45 p.m., witnessed by Miss Tate. You claimed to be in the billiard room thereafter, but Mr. Baxter admitted, under my gentle questioning, that you left the room at 10:20 p.m., returning only at 10:50. Where were you, monsieur, in those crucial 30 minutes? Charles's face flushed. "I went for a walk, that's all. Needed air." "A walk," Poirot repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. "And yet, no one saw you. Curious, is it not?" Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Whitmore. "And you, Doctor, your devotion to Lady Eleanor is no secret. Sir Reginald's death would secure her fortune and yours, should she choose to remarry. The poison, a subtle toxin found in Sir Reginald's glass, was one you, as a physician, could procure. The glass, wiped clean of prints, was found in the study, yet you claimed to have been nowhere near it that night." Whitmore's voice was sharp. "This is preposterous, Poirot. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald. No reason." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Or perhaps a reason so deeply buried that only the little grey cells could uncover it. The letter, hidden in your desk, from Sir Reginald, threatening to expose your financial ruin unless you ceased your attentions to Lady Eleanor. That, Doctor, this motive." The room was silent now, the tension palpable. Poirot turned to Lady Eleanor. "And you, madame, your composure is admirable, but your grief is not as deep as it appears. The will, altered only days before Sir Reginald's death, left you a fortune, but only if he died before the new will could be signed. You knew this, did you not?" Lady Eleanor's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Poirot pressed on. "The truth, Ms. Amos, is this. Sir Reginald was poisoned in his study. Between 10 o'clock and 10:15 p.m. the poison acted swiftly, but not instantly. He staggered to the cliffs, perhaps seeking help, but there he was met by his killer or killers who ensured his death by pushing him to the rocks below. The watch was broken to fix the time, the body positioned to suggest a fall. But the tide, the silk, the cigarette case, they betrayed the truth." Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Miss Henshaw, you were in love with Sir Reginald, were you not? His rejection drove you to despair, and when you learned of his plan to disinherit Charles, you saw an opportunity. You poisoned his drink, knowing his habit of walking the cliffs at night. But you did not act alone. Charles, you followed your father, and when you found him weakened, you ensured his fall. Together, you crafted a story of accident, but you underestimated Hercule. Clara's composure shattered, a sob escaping her lips. Charles leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You have no proof, Poirot. This is madness. Poirot held up his list. The proof, monsieur, is in the details. The poison in your mother's garden shed, the silk scarf, the cigarette case, the mud, the timing all converge on you and Miss Henshaw. You acted together, driven by greed and wounded pride. The room erupted in chaos. Clara's tears, Charles's protests, Lady Eleanor's stunned silence. Hastings stepped forward, his voice steady. Poirot, are you certain? Poirot nodded, his expression serene. The little grey cells, mon ami, they do not lie. The truth is revealed, and justice will follow. As the police was summoned, Poirot stepped back, his work complete, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Chapter 11. The reflection, the aftermath of Hercule Poirot's revelation hung over Pennington Hall like a storm that had broken but left the air heavy with unspoken tensions. The drawing room, so recently a stage for Poirot's dramatic denouement, was now empty save for Poirot himself and Captain Arthur Hastings, who stood by the window, gazing out at the darkening cliffs. The sea beyond churned restlessly, its waves a muted roar against the rocks where Sir Reginald Pennington had met his end. The mantel clock ticked softly, marking 6:23 p.m. on the evening of August 15, 1945, a day that had forever altered the lives of those within the hall. Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his small hands folded neatly in his lap, his green eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. His impeccable black suit and perfectly waxed mustache seemed untouched by the chaos of the afternoon, as though he existed in a world apart, where order and precision reigned supreme. Hastings turned from the window, his honest face clouded with a mixture of awe and disquiet. He ran a hand through his graying hair, his voice low but earnest. Poirot, old chap, I'll never understand how you do it, he said, shaking his head. The way you pieced it all together, the poison, the scarf, the watch, it's like you see the world through a different lens. But I confess, it leaves me rather shaken to think Clara and Charles could be capable of such a thing. Poirot tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. Mon ami, it is not a lens, but the little grey cells. They observe, they analyze, they connect. The human heart, it is complex, but it leaves traces that cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. Hastings paced a few steps, his hands clasped behind his back. Still, it's a grim business. Clara Henshaw, so composed, so proper, and Charles, with his bluster and charm, murderers, both of them, and poor Lady Eleanor, to lose her husband and now her son to this tragedy, it's almost too much to bear. Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes remained sharp. The tragedy, Hastings, it is not only in the loss of life, but in the choices that lead to such loss. Greed, resentment, unrequited love, these are the currents that pull the soul toward destruction. Sir Reginald, he was not a man without fault. His threats, his coldness, they sowed the seeds of his demise. But murder, it is never justified. It is a stain upon the order of things, and it is my duty, my calling, to restore that order. Hastings stopped pacing and leaned against the fireplace, his gaze settling on Poirot. You talk of order, Poirot, but sometimes I wonder if there's any order left in this world. The war's barely over, and here we are unraveling crimes in an English country house. It makes one question. Well, everything. Poirot rose from his chair, his movements deliberate, and crossed to a small table where a decanter of brandy sat untouched. He poured 2 small glasses, handing one to Hastings with a gesture of quiet camaraderie. You are troubled, mon ami, and it is understandable. The world, it is bruised, its heart heavy with the scars of war. But there is always order, Hastings, even in chaos. The mind, when trained, can find it. The clues, the motives, the contradictions, they are the threads of truth, waiting to be woven into clarity. Hastings took the glass, his fingers brushing the crystal as he considered Poirot's words. You make it sound so simple, but it's anything but. That cigarette case, the silk scarf, the tide tables, how did you know they weren't just, well, accidents, coincidences? Poirot's eyes gleamed with a flicker of pride. Coincidences, Hastings, are the refuge of the lazy mind. In a case such as this, every detail matters. The cigarette case, with the initials CH, was no mere trinket. It was a symbol of Clara's attachment to Sir Reginald, a gift she could not admit to owning. The silk scarf, caught on a thorn, was not blown there by chance. It was torn in a moment of haste, of panic. And the tide, mon cher, the tide does not lie. Its rhythm is as precise as a Swiss watch. When I learned the body was found too far from the water's edge for a fall at 10:42 p.m., I knew the scene had been staged. Hastings sipped his brandy, the warmth of the liquid doing little to ease the chill in his thoughts. And the poison, how did you deduce it was Clara who administered it? Charles, I can see with his temper and his greed, but Clara, she seemed so devoted to her work, to the library. Poirot set his glass down, his fingers tracing the rim as he spoke. Clara Henshaw. She was a woman of intellect, but also of passion, hidden beneath her reserve. Her love for Sir Reginald was not returned, and this rejection it festered. When she learned of his plan to alter his will, to leave her nothing, she acted not out of greed alone, but out of wounded pride. The poison, a subtle alkaloid, was one she could access through the garden shed, where she tended her herbs. She knew Sir Reginald's habits, his nightly walk, his solitary drink in the study. She placed the poison in his glass, knowing it would weaken him, make him vulnerable. Charles, he was her accomplice, driven by his own motives, his fear of disinheritance, his resentment of his father's control. Hastings shook his head, his voice tinged with disbelief. And they thought they could outwit you, Poirot. They thought they could stage it all to look like an accident. Many have tried, Hastings, Poirot said, his tone almost wistful. But the truth, it is like a melody, it cannot be silenced. The little grey cells. They hear it, they follow it, and they bring it to light. The room fell silent. The only sound, the distant crash of waves and the steady tick of the clock. Hastings looked at Poirot, his friend's small figure somehow larger than life in the dim light. What happens now, Poirot? Charles and Clara. They'll face trial, I suppose. And Lady Eleanor, Dr. Whitmore, Miss Tate, what of them? Poirot's gaze turned to the window where the last light of day painted the sky in hues of violet and gold. Justice. It will take its course. Charles and Clara. They will answer for their crime. Lady Eleanor. She will mourn, but she will endure, as she has always done. Dr. Whitmore. He will carry the weight of his secrets, but he is not a murderer. And Miss Tate, poor child, she will find peace, knowing she played no part in this tragedy. Hastings nodded, his expression softening. And you, Poirot, you'll move on to the next puzzle, I suppose. Always another mystery waiting. Poirot smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened the lines of his face. Perhaps, mon ami, but for now, I will take my brandy, and I will reflect. The world it turns, and Hercule Poirot turns with it, seeking always the truth. He raised his glass to Hastings, who returned the gesture. And together they stood in the quiet of Pennington Hall, the weight of the case settling into memory. Outside, the tide receded, leaving the cliffs bare under the gathering stars, as if the sea itself acknowledged the resolution of a mystery that had briefly disturbed its eternal rhythm. Poirot turned toward the door, his step light, his mind already turning to the next challenge. "Come, Hastings," he said, his voice bright. "The night it calls, and we must answer." And with that, he stepped into the hall, leaving the drawing-room behind, its secrets laid bare by the brilliance of his little grey cells. Chapter 12. The departure the morning of August 16th, 1945. Dawned crisp and clear over Pennington Hall, the sea beyond the cliffs sparkling under a sun that seemed to promise renewal, despite the shadow of tragedy that lingered within the estate's walls. The air carried the tang of salt and the faint sweetness of late summer roses, their petals scattered across the gravel drive where a black Daimler waited, its engine idling softly. Hercule Poirot stood beside the car, his small, immaculate figure, clad in a tailored overcoat, his hat tilted at a precise angle, his mustache a flawless crescent. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever loyal, stood at his side, his suitcase already stowed in the boot, his expression a blend of relief and melancholy. The great oak door of the hall opened, and Lady Eleanor Pennington emerged, her black morning dress stark against the pale stone of the facade. Her face, though composed, bore the faint lines of sleepless nights, and her eyes held a quiet strength that spoke of resilience in the face of betrayal. She approached Poirot, her gloved hands clasped before her, and inclined her head in a gesture of respect. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but soft, "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You have brought truth to light, though it is a truth that pains me deeply. My husband's death, my son's actions." She paused, her lips tightening. "It is a heavy burden, but I am grateful for your clarity." Poirot bowed slightly, his green eyes meeting hers with a warmth tempered by his customary reserve. "Madame, the truth. It is not always kind, but it is necessary. Hercule Poirot seeks only to restore order where chaos has trespassed. Your strength, it does you credit, and it will carry you forward." Lady Eleanor's gaze flickered to Hastings, and she offered a small, sad smile. "Captain Hastings, your kindness has been a comfort in these dark days. I wish you both well." Hastings, ever the gentleman, removed his hat and bowed. "Lady Eleanor, I'm sorry for your loss and for all that's happened. If there's anything I can do." She shook her head gently. "You have done enough, both of you. Now, I must rebuild what remains of Pennington Hall, for myself and for those who depend on it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable but his tone gentle. "You will succeed, madame. The heart it endures, and the spirit it finds its way." As Lady Eleanor turned back toward the hall, Dr. Harold Whitmore appeared at the door, his face drawn but resolute. He approached Poirot, his steps hesitant, his hands clasped as if to steady himself. "Monsieur Poirot, I must thank you, though I confess I feel the weight of my own failings. Had I been more forthright, perhaps—" He trailed off, his eyes dropping to the ground. Poirot raised a hand, his voice firm but not unkind. "Doctor, the past, It cannot be undone, but the future, it is yours to shape. You were not the architect of this crime, though your silence protected no one. Learn from this, and let it guide you." Whitmore nodded, his jaw tightening, and stepped back, allowing Poirot and Hastings to turn toward the car. Miss Emily Tate, her apron slightly askew, hurried from the side entrance, clutching a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, please take this. It's just some scones from the kitchen. I wanted to thank you." Poirot accepted the parcel with a gracious nod, his fingers brushing the paper with care. "Mademoiselle Tate, your kindness. It is a light in this house of shadows. Merci beaucoup." Hastings smiled warmly, tipping his hat. "You're a good sort, Miss Tate. Take care of yourself." She bobbed a curtsy, her voice trembling. "I will, sir, and I'm sorry for everything." As she retreated, Poirot and Hastings climbed into the Daimler, the driver closing the door with a soft thud. The car began its slow descent down the drive, the crunch of gravel under the tires, a steady rhythm against the distant crash of waves. Hastings leaned back, his gaze fixed on the receding silhouette of Pennington Hall, its turrets stark against the morning sky. "Well, Poirot," he said, his tone reflective, "another case closed, but I can't help feeling unsettled. Clara and Charles, they seemed so ordinary, yet they committed such an extraordinary crime. How do you make sense of it?" Poirot adjusted his gloves, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Mon ami, the human heart, it is a labyrinth. What seems ordinary on the surface hides depths of passion, of fear, of desperation. Clara Henshaw she loved too fiercely, and it turned to poison. Charles Pennington, he coveted what he could not earn, and it led to betrayal. Their ordinariness, it is their mask, but the little gray cells, they see through it." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. "And yet, you saw it, all the silk scarf, the tide, the cigarette case." "I was there, Poirot, and I saw nothing." "How do you train yourself to notice what others miss?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. "It is not training, Hastings, but discipline. The mind, it must be orderly like a garden well tended. Each detail, it is a seed small, perhaps insignificant alone, but together, they grow into the truth. The scarf, it was not merely silk, it was a moment of carelessness. The tide, it was not merely water, it was a witness to time. The cigarette case, it was not merely metal, it was a confession of the heart. To see Hastings one must look with intention." The car wound through the coastal lanes, the cliffs giving way to rolling fields, their green expanse dotted with grazing sheep. Hastings chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You make it sound almost poetic, Poirot, but I suppose that's why you're the detective, and I'm just the chap who tags along." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. Nan, mon ami, you are more than that. You are the heart to my mind, the warmth to my precision. Without you, Hercule Poirot would be a lesser man." Hastings flushed, caught off guard by the compliment. "Well, that's awfully decent of you to say, old boy." The car slowed as they approached the railway station, its platform bustling with travelers, their faces a blur of purpose and haste. The driver opened the door and Poirot stepped out, his movements as precise as ever. Hastings followed, clutching the parcel of scones, his expression lighter now, as if the weight of the case had begun to lift. As they stood on the platform, waiting for the London train, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low but clear. "This case, Hastings, it reminds us that, even in peace, the war of the heart continues. But we bring light to the darkness. It is enough, for now." The train's whistle pierced the air, and Poirot adjusted his hat, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Come, mon ami. London awaits, and with it, perhaps, another puzzle for the little gray cells." Hastings grinned, his spirits buoyed by his friend's unshakable confidence. As the train pulled in, they boarded, leaving Pennington Hall and its secrets behind, carried forward by the rhythm of the rails and the promise of new mysteries yet to be solved. Chapter 13, The London Interlude. The train to London rattled through the late morning of August 16, 1945, its steady rhythm, a soothing counterpoint to the turmoil left behind at Pennington Hall. The countryside flashed by in a blur of green fields and hedgerows, the scars of war still visible in the occasional bombed-out ruin or hastily rebuilt cottage. Inside the first-class carriage, Hercule Poirot sat by the window, his small, immaculate figure framed against the glass, his green eyes fixed on the passing landscape with an air of quiet contemplation. His black patent leather shoes gleamed, and his mustache, as always, was a masterpiece of precision. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings fidgeted with the parcel of scones from Miss Tate, his honest face betraying a restlessness that the journey had not yet dispelled. The carriage was sparsely occupied, save for a dear-looking businessman engrossed in his newspaper and a young woman knitting in the corner, her needles clicking softly. The air smelled faintly of coal smoke and polished wood, and the faint hum of conversation from the next carriage drifted through the partition. Hastings leaned back in his seat, his hat resting on his knee, and glanced at Poirot. "I say," he began, his voice low to avoid disturbing their fellow passengers. "It's odd, isn't it, to be leaving Pennington Hall behind? With all that's happened, it feels unfinished, somehow. Clara and Charles in custody, Lady Eleanor left to pick up the pieces. I can't help wondering what comes next for them." Poirot turned from the window, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Mon ami, the case, it is finished. The truth has been uncovered, the guilty apprehended. What comes next? It is not for Hercule Poirot to decide. Justice, it will take its course, and life, it will continue, as it always does. For Lady Eleanor, there will be pain, but also resilience. The human spirit, it is remarkable in its capacity to endure." Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. "I suppose you're right. Still, it's a grim sort of justice. Clara, with her quiet devotion, and Charles, with his brash confidence, I never would have pegged them for murderers. It makes one question one's judgment of character." Poirot's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "The judgment of character, Hastings, it is not a science, but an art. The heart, it wears many masks, and even the most astute observer may be deceived. But the little gray cells, they do not rely on impressions alone. They seek the truth beneath the surface, the contradiction, the inconsistency, the hidden motive." Hastings chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You and your gray cells, Poirot. I swear, if I had half your knack for seeing through people, I'd have solved the case myself." Poirot raised an eyebrow, his tone teasing but warm. Nan, mon cher Hastings. You see, with the heart, and that is your strength. You feel the humanity of those we meet, while I dissect it. Together we are formidable." Nan Hastings flushed, a grin spreading across his face. "Well, when you put it like that, I suppose we make a decent team." The train slowed as it approached a small station, the platform bustling with a handful of passengers clutching suitcases and parcels. Poirot's gaze drifted to the young woman knitting, her fingers moving with practiced ease. For a moment, his eyes narrowed, as if some small detail had caught his attention, but he said nothing, returning his focus to Hastings. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice taking on a reflective tone. "What is it that troubles you still? The case, it is solved, yet I sense a restlessness in you. Is it the crime itself, or something more?" Hastings hesitated, his fingers tightening around the parcel of scones. "I don't know, Poirot. Perhaps it's the war, lingering like a bad dream. Or perhaps it's the idea that people like Clara and Charles, people we sat across from, shared tea with, could harbor such darkness. It makes one wonder about trust, about who we really know." Poirot nodded, his expression softening. "The war, it has left its mark on us all, Hastings. It has taught us that even in peace, there is conflict within the heart, within the home. But trust, it is not lost. It is earned, through truth and understanding. You and I, we seek that truth, and in doing so, we restore a little of the world's order." The train lurched forward again, picking up speed as it left the station behind. Hastings leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Speaking of truth, Poirot, there's one thing I've been meaning to ask. That cigarette case with Clara's initials, how did you know it wasn't just a coincidence? I mean, CH could have stood for Charles, or even someone else entirely." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Coincidence, Hastings? Not the cigarette case. It was too personal, too finely crafted to be a mere trinket. And Clara's reaction when I mentioned it, her hesitation, her quick glance to the side, it betrayed her. The initials, they were a clue, but her behavior, it was the confirmation. The little gray cells, they noticed such things." Hastings shook his head, marveling. "You're a marvel, Poirot. I'd have walked right past it, thinking it was nothing." Poirot waved a hand dismissively, though his smile betrayed a hint of pride. "It is nothing, Hastings, until it is everything. The smallest detail, a glance, a pause, a misplaced object, it is the thread that unravels the tapestry of lies." The carriage fell silent, save for the rhythmic clatter of the train and the soft clicking of the knitting needles. Poirot's gaze drifted to the window once more, his thoughts seemingly far away. Hastings opened the parcel of scones, the faint scent of butter and currants filling the air. He offered one to Poirot, who declined with a polite shake of his head. "No mercy, mon ami. My appetite, it is for puzzles, not pastries. But you enjoy Miss Tate. She has a good heart, and her scones, they are a gesture of hope." Hastings took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Hope," he murmured. "That's what we need, isn't it? After all this murder, betrayal, secret, something to hold on to." Poirot nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "We, Hastings, hope and truth, they are the foundation of order, and we are its guardians." As the train neared London, the spires of the city began to appear on the horizon, their outlines softened by a faint haze. The businessman folded his newspaper, the young woman tucked away her knitting, and the carriage seemed to brace itself for the bustle of the capital. Poirot adjusted his hat, his posture as erect as ever, his mind already turning to the next challenge. "Hastings," he said, his tone brightening. "London, it is a city of secrets, Nan. Perhaps there is another puzzle waiting for us, another truth to uncover." Hastings grinned, his spirits lifting. "With you around, Poirot, No doubt we'll find it, or rather, it'll find us. The train whistle sounded sharp and clear as they pulled into the station, the platform alive with the hum of arrivals and departures. Poirot and Hastings stepped down, their figures small against the vastness of the city, yet undaunted by the mysteries that awaited. For now, Pennington Hall was behind them, its secrets laid bare, but the world, as ever, was full of enigmas for Hercule Poirot and his faithful friend to unravel. Chapter 14. The unseen thread. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling platform of Paddington Station as Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings disembarked from the train. On August 16, 1945, the air was thick with the mingled sense of coal smoke, warm metal, and the faint perfume of a flower vendor's stall nearby. Travelers hurried past, their footsteps echoing on the stone platform, while porters called out destinations in clipped tones. Poirot, his overcoat draped elegantly over one arm, adjusted his hat with a precise flick of his wrist, his green eyes scanning the crowd with an alertness that belied the fatigue of the journey. Hastings, clutching the parcel of scones from Miss Tate, seemed momentarily overwhelmed by the city's energy. His honest face creased with a mixture of relief and lingering unease. "London, Poirot," Hastings said, his voice carrying a note of wonder as he dodged a harried businessman. "It's like stepping into another world after Pennington Hall. All that quiet, that tragedy feels a lifetime away already." Poirot nodded, his expression serene but his eyes sharp. "Oui, mon ami, the city. It has a way of sweeping away the past, but the mind of Hercule Poirot, it does not forget. The case of Sir Reginald Pennington, it is closed, yet there is always one thread, one small detail, that lingers." Nan. Hastings raised an eyebrow, pausing as they approached a bench near the station's entrance. "A thread? Don't tell me you're having second thoughts, Poirot. You were so certain Clara and Charles, the poison, the cliffs. It all fit together like one of your infernal jigsaw puzzles." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, though his gaze remained distant. "Certain, oui, but the mind, it is restless. The little grey cells, they continue to turn, to question. There is a detail, Hastings, a small inconsistency that I have not yet fully resolved. It is like a note out of tune in an otherwise perfect symphony." Hastings set the parcel down on the bench, his curiosity piqued. "Go on then, what's this detail?" "You can't leave me hanging, old chap." Poirot hesitated, his fingers brushing the brim of his hat as he considered his words. "It is the matter of the cigarette case, mon ami, the initials CH. They pointed to Clara Henshaw, oui, but there was another possibility, one I dismissed too quickly. Perhaps the case, it was found in Sir Reginald's study, yet Clara claimed never to have entered that room after dinner. If she lied, it is consistent with her guilt. But if she spoke the truth, then how did the case come to be there?" Hastings frowned, his brow furrowing. "But you said her reaction gave her away, her hesitation, her glance. Surely that's proof enough." Poirot shook his head, his voice low but deliberate. "The reaction, it was real, but it was not necessarily guilt. It could have been fear, surprise, or even recognition of another's deceit. The case, it may have been placed in the study to implicate her, to draw attention away from the true orchestrator of the crime." Hastings leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You mean, someone else?" "But Charles confessed, Poirot. He broke down in that drawing room, admitted to pushing his father. And Clara, she didn't deny the poison." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "Oui, they are guilty, but the question remains, were they the only ones? The poison, the push, they are acts of execution, but the plan, the mind behind it, it may belong to another. Someone who knew how to manipulate Clara's love, Charles's greed, and turn them into instruments of murder." Hastings stared at Poirot, his mouth slightly agape. "Good heavens, Poirot, you're saying there's a mastermind we haven't caught, but who? Lady Eleanor Whitmore? Surely not. Miss Tate's barely more than a child." Poirot raised a hand, his tone calm but firm. "Patience, Hastings. I do not say there is a mastermind, only that the possibility exists. The little grey cells, they demand completeness, and there is one detail that does not fit. The letter in Dr. Whitmore's desk, the one from Sir Reginald, threatening to expose his financial ruin, it was written in a hand that matched Sir Reginald's, yet the ink, it was fresh, not faded as one would expect from a letter written weeks before. It suggests a forgery, perhaps, or a letter planted to mislead." Hastings shook his head, his voice tinged with exasperation. "But why? If Charles and Clara did the deed, what's the point of planting letters or cigarette cases? It's all so convoluted." Poirot's smile was almost indulgent. "Convoluted, oui, but that is the nature of the human heart, Hastings. It weaves webs of deception, not for clarity, but for protection. Someone in Pennington Hall wished to ensure that Clara and Charles would bear the blame, perhaps to shield themselves or another. I must reflect further, but for now, we return to London, and we wait." The station clock struck 4 p.m., its chimes echoing across the platform. A porter approached, offering to carry their bags, but Poirot waved him away with a polite gesture. Hastings picked up the parcel of scones, his expression a mix of intrigue and frustration. "You're a devil for keeping me guessing, Poirot. So, what's next? Do we go back to Pennington Hall? Dig deeper?" Poirot adjusted his gloves, his movements precise. Nan mon ami. For now, we rest. The mind it must be allowed to settle, like good wine. The truth it will reveal itself in time, and Hercule Poirot will be ready. For now, we return to my flat, and perhaps we indulge in a tisana moment of calm before the next storm. Hastings chuckled, his mood lightening. A tisane. I'd rather have a decent cup of tea, but I'll humor you. Lead on, Poirot. They made their way through the station, weaving through the crowd with Poirot's characteristic precision and Hastings's more haphazard stride, as they stepped into a waiting taxi. The city of London unfolded before the mid-streets, alive with the hum of post-war renewal. Its buildings a mix of grandeur and resilience. Poirot leaned back in the seat, his eyes half closed, but his mind, as always, was at work, sifting through the unseen threads of the Pennington case. Hastings, he said suddenly, his voice soft but clear, there is one other detail. The green silk scarf, caught on the thorn, it was torn. But the tear was clean, deliberate, not the ragged edge of an accident. It was meant to be found. 2.2 Clara. Someone wished her to be seen as the guilty one, perhaps to protect another. Hastings turned to him, his eyes wide. You're saying the scarf was planted too, but who, Poirot? Who would go to such lengths? Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. That, mon ami, is the question. And when Hercule Poirot asks a question, the answer, it cannot hide forever. The taxi rolled on, carrying them deeper into the heart of London, where the shadows of Pennington Hall lingered in Poirot's mind. A puzzle not yet fully solved, a thread not yet fully pulled. Chapter 15. The final knot. The soft glow of lamplight bathed Hercule Poirot's London flat in a warm, intimate ambience, a stark contrast to the cold, windswept cliffs of Pennington Hall. It was the evening of August 17, 1945, and the city outside hummed with the quiet energy of a world rebuilding itself. Inside, Poirot sat at his polished mahogany desk, his small hands folded neatly before him, his green eyes fixed on a single sheet of paper, a letter, its edges slightly creased, bearing the crest of Pennington Hall. Captain Arthur Hastings lounged in an armchair by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in hand, his honest face etched with curiosity and a trace of impatience. The faint ticking of a carriage clock on the mantel marked the time. 7:42 p.m. Poirot, Hastings said, setting his glass down with a soft clink. You've been staring at that letter for the better part of an hour. You've got that look in your eye, the one that says you've found something, but you're not ready to share it. Come on, old chap, out with it. What's this final thread you've been tugging at? Poirot's lips curved into a faint, almost mischievous smile, though his gaze remained fixed on the letter. Patience, mon ami. The little grey cells, they work at their own pace. This letter, it is the final knot in the tapestry of the Pennington Kaiser, not that, when untied, reveals the full truth. Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowing. The letter from Sir Reginald to Dr. Whitmore. You mean the one threatening to expose his financial troubles? You said it might be a forgery, but Charles and Clara confessed. Poirot, what more is there to uncover? Poirot raised a finger, his voice calm but laced with intensity. Confessions, Hastings, they are not always the end of the story. They are, sometimes, a curtain drawn to hide a deeper truth. Clara Henshaw and Charles Pennington, they are guilty. With the poison, the push, they committed these acts. But the mind behind the crime, the one who wove the plan, that is what I seek now. This letter, it is the key. He lifted the letter, holding it to the light as if it might reveal its secrets under scrutiny. The ink, Hastings, it is too fresh for a letter supposedly written weeks before Sir Reginald's death, and the phrasing too precise, too calculated. Sir Reginald, he was a man of blunt words, not this careful prose. This letter was written to ensure that Dr. Whitmore would be suspected, to divert attention from the true orchestrator. Hastings's eyes widened, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're saying someone else planned the murder, but who? Poirot, Lady Eleanor. She stood to gain the most, but she seemed so broken by it all. Poirot shook his head, his mustache twitching slightly. Nan, not Lady Eleanor. Her grief, it was genuine, though tempered by her strength. No, the one who planned this crime is one who moved in the shadows, who knew the hearts of Clara and Charles and used them as pawns. It is Roland Baxter, the solicitor, the man who seemed so unobtrusive, so loyal to the Pennington family. Hastings nearly spilled his whiskey, his jaw dropping. Baxter, that quiet old chap with the cane, but he barely said a word during the whole affair. What possible motive could he have? Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a puzzle nearing completion. Motive, Hastings, is often hidden in the past. Roland Baxter, he has served the Pennington family for decades. But his loyalty was not to Sir Reginald, it was to the estate, to its wealth, to its power. I made inquiries, discreetly, through my contacts in London. Baxter, he has debts, significant debts, accrued through years of unwise investments. Sir Reginald, he suspected this, and threatened to dismiss Baxter, to expose his mismanagement of the estate's finances. Such exposure would ruin him. Hastings shook his head, struggling to keep up. So, what you're saying, Baxter manipulated Clara and Charles into killing Sir Reginald? How? Poirot's voice was steady, his words precise. Baxter, he is a man of observation, like myself. He knew of Clara's unrequited love for Sir Reginald, her pain at his rejection. He knew of Charles's resentment, his fear of He planted the letter in Whitmore's desk, knowing it would cast suspicion on the doctor. He placed the cigarette case in the study, ensuring Clara would be implicated. The green silk scarf, torn deliberately and caught on a thorn, it was Baxter who ensured it was found. To point to Clara's presence at the cliffs, he whispered to Charles, perhaps of his father's plans to change the will, fanning the flames of his greed. He suggested to Clara subtly that Sir Reginald's death would free her from her pain. He did not wield the poison or push the body, but he set the stage, and they played their parts. Hastings stared at Poirot, his mind racing. Good heavens, Poirot, it's diabolical, but how do you prove it? Clara and Charles have taken the blame, and Baxter's covered his tracks. Poirot tapped the letter gently against his desk. This letter, it is his mistake. The ink, the paper they traced to a specific supplier in London, one Baxter uses for his legal documents. I have confirmed this with a telegram this morning. And there is more. Hastings, the night of the murder, Baxter claimed to have retired to his room after playing billiards with Charles. But the housemaid, Miss Tate, she saw him in the corridor near the study at 10:15 p.m. when he claimed to be asleep. She did not think it significant, but to Poirot it is everything. Hastings let out a low whistle, his admiration evident. You've done it again, Poirot. But what now? Do we go to the police? Confront Baxter? Poirot rose, his movements as precise as ever, and crossed to the window, gazing out at the London street below. The police, they will be informed. I have already sent a message to Inspector Japp, who will investigate Baxter's financial records and question him further. The evidence it will build, and the truth it will emerge. For now Hercule Poirot has done his part. The little grey cells, they have untied the final knot. Hastings stood, his expression a mix of awe and relief. You're a marvel, Poirot. I thought the case was over, but you've peeled back another layer. It's like you never stop thinking. Poirot turned, his smile warm but tinged with melancholy. The mind, Hastings, it seeks order, always. The world, it is full of chaos, but the truth, it is the anchor. We find it, we hold it, and we move forward. He gestured to the tea tray on the sideboard, where a steaming pot of tisane awaited. Now, mon ami, let us have a moment of peace. A tisane perhaps, and a scone from the good Miss Tate. The world, it will wait for Hercule Poirot. Hastings grinned, pouring himself another whiskey instead. To truth, then, Poirot, and to you, for finding it. They raised their glasses. The clink a quiet punctuation to the resolution of a mystery that had stretched from the cliffs of Pennington Hall to the heart of London. Outside, the city moved on, its secrets ever present. But for now, Poirot's flat was a haven of order, where the little grey cells rested, ready for the next challenge.